Welcome to the Crunch McDabbles Show. I'm your host, Crunch McDabbles. This is the only show where we train to fight back against the hordes of evil with strategy. Today's show, the Eldritch Archer. Wow, we've got the Secrets of Magic coming out soon with the Magus, or Magus, or Mahus, or however you choose to pronounce Magus. That's all right with us, and we're excited about that, and yet, already in our midst is one who, with an utterance, incants magic spells into their bow and then fires, sending an arrow soaring gracefully through the air. And then at the last second, it ramps up and slams into the target in a blast of both shaft and sorcery. We're talking about the Eldritch Archer, and this archetype is amazing. Let's take a look at it. First, it's a level 6 archetype, which makes it a little different right off the bat. All it has as a requirement is that you are an expert with the bow, and for game purposes, a bow could be a crossbow or a bow. But this is a little bit of a tricky requirement for some classes. All of the martial classes are fine. They can take this right at level 6 with no problem. But most caster classes aren't going to have expert proficiency until level 11, so they couldn't take this till level 12. The exception to that is the War Priest. If they have a deity whose favored weapon is a bow, they could take this at level 8. But overall, for casting classes, this is tricky. But if you do want to get into this one, what do you get? Well, level 6 with Eldritch Archer Dedication Feat, basically you win Pathfinder. First, you get spell casting. Even if you know nothing about magic, suddenly overnight, now you cast spells. Now it's just one cantrip, and it must be a cantrip with a spell attack roll, but it is magic, and magic is always great. So that's what you get right there, and it's great. And it turns out the Eldritch Archer is a spontaneous caster with a spell repertoire, and they use charisma as their key spellcasting ability. However, if you already cast spells from spell slots, for whatever reason, you just continue casting spells as normal in whatever tradition you are in, but you do get that extra cantrip with the dedication. So that's cool, right? Cool. The other thing you get with the dedication is the other way you win Pathfinder. It's called Eldritch Shot. It's a 3-action attack, but these 3 actions, they included with that is a spell attack and a bow attack. You make them together into one super attack. Now you could do all this anyways using 3 actions. Just make a spell attack and a bow attack. But the big difference, the awesome thing about Eldritch Shot is both of the attacks are combined into one attack with no multiple attack penalty. That's the benefit. So right at level 6, when you take the Eldritch Archer dedication, you get a cantrip and you get Eldritch Shot, and you can fire that cantrip with your Eldritch Shot heightened automatically to half your level rounded up. So right at level 6, you're firing that cantrip at spell level 3. And the list of cantrips that you can use that have a spell attack, it's a pretty good list. Tanglefoot is interesting. It immobilizes targets. It doesn't have damage. Maybe not the one you want, unless you want to mobilize things. Acid Splash heightens in a weird way, so it's a little bit less damage. It's a +2 instead of a +1. But the great thing about Acid Splash, which might make it pretty good, it gives you sort of a mini area of effect with your Eldritch Shot, which is nice because there's splash damage with it. And then Ray of Frost, Produce Flame, Divine Lance, they all end up with similar damage, but each has a unique benefit. Ray of Frost decreases movement on a crit. Produce Flame gives persistent fire damage on a crit. But Telekinetic Projectile is probably the best cantrip for damage. The arrow pulls with it some nearby debris and slams that into the target after dealing arrow damage. Or for flavor, you could do this. If you don't mind dealing nothing but piercing damage, throw an arrow up in the air, then fire your arrow, and the one arrow follows the other arrow, and they both slam into the target. Either way, the result is good damage for a cantrip. At level 8, when you take basic Eldritch Archer spellcasting, everything goes berserk. Since this archetype is kind of strange and you don't get the basic spellcasting feat until level 8, instead of level 4 where you normally get it. But what happens as a result is you get 3 spell slots right away when you take the feat. overnight. Now suddenly you have a first, a second, and a third level spell slot, which is great. And you get a first and a second and a third level spell along with that. And don't forget, you could take a heightened version of a lower level spell for your spell for a level. So don't forget that. And with basic spell casting, you can make one of these a signature spell. And with your signature spell, you can always heighten it into a higher level spell slot whenever you want. So it makes sense to make one of your first level spells your signature spell, and then you can heighten it up. And that's great because first level has some of the best spells. Hydraulic Push and Shocking Grasp, they both do about the same amount of damage, and it's good damage. But I like the visuals of launching a wave of water with your bow, and it has a benefit of knocking targets back, which is great. That's why I like Hydraulic Push. But being able to make a Shocking Grasp attack at 100-foot range instead of as a touch attack, that's pretty fantastic too, especially against a metal or a metal armored target. But there's also Ray of Enfeeblement at first level too, so you could take that one. I guess it's kind of interesting. And at second level, you have Acid Arrow. If you like rolling d8s over a d12 or 2d6s or whatever, this gets you a decent amount of persistent damage too with it. The persistent damage doesn't double on a critical though, which is too bad. So what you see I had to do with the damage here is I had to separate the base damage and the persistent damage. So you'd have to add those together just in your mind. And then on a critical hit, you only double this number here and then add the persistent damage on top of that. And you know, persistent damage, it can only go off once, so you get that factor too. But what you see though is that the damage works out pretty similar to Hydraulic Push or Shocking Grasp too. So it's not a bad spell. Acid Arrow is a pretty good one. At third level, you have Searing Light, and I love this spell. If you think there might be an undead or a fiend in your future, which is always likely in this game, Searing Light in the hands of an Eldritch Archer versus those targets, it's some of the most damage I've seen. Because you basically double the damage, you add in that good damage, which doubles the amount of dice you roll, and then on a critical hit, that number then gets doubled. So you can see here the numbers versus fiends and undead, it's really high. And at level 8, just to put this in perspective, you could easily hit triple digits on a critical hit right at level 8. And at level 20, you would be in the 200 damage range on a critical hit. So that's phenomenal. Chilling Darkness, it's basically the inverse of Searing Light, which if you were fighting Celestials for some reason, it would be an equally great spell. Otherwise skip it. Moving on to some higher level spells, Disintegrate at level 6. It looks great. You could get it at level 16. The 12d10 sounds amazing. The visuals of disintegrating a target with your arrow at range is fantastic. The Fortitude saving throw is extremely unfortunate because your DC isn't going to be that great. And you have to hit and then they get to make a save. I don't like that. And you know they're going to make their save all the time anyways. The other thing about this, it's only on the Arcane spell list. So if you take this one, you wouldn't have Searing Light. So I'd skip it, stick with the Primal spell list. Or if you're in the Arcane tradition, I guess you could take it and maybe you could always use a signature spell in this spell slot and then have Disintegrate if you wanted to use it for some reason. And finally, Polar Ray. It's the highest level spell. You wouldn't be able to get it until level 20. Draining the target along with the damage, that's a great combination. At level 20, if you want it, it's there. So how does the Eldritch Shot damage stack up? Well, you know that two-handed fighter we're always talking about him. He's always killing everything with the brutal finish and the furious focus and all that. Well, there has been a long-standing Crunch McDowell's prophecy. A prophecy that one would come and rise up from the ashes and deliver us from the tyranny of our two-handed overlord and finally, definitively wipe that junk smile off his chiseled jaw. And today, that prophecy is fulfilled. Let's look at level 14. You would probably have taken Expert Eldritch Archer spellcasting at level 12. And then at level 14, you would automatically get a level 5 spell slot. You could drop a Shocking Grasp, heightened to spell level 5, onto your bow, and send forth, at range, a crippling 60-12 electricity damage. That's 39 average damage right there just from the spell. and the arrow damage from your +2 greater striking composite longbow, all of that doubled on a critical hit, plus 2d10 deadly damage. That's more damage than the Greatsword Fighter, even making their desperate finisher with brutal finish. See ya. Now here is the thing, your best Eldritch Shot attack is going to use up your highest level spell slot, and then you move on to your next highest level spell slot, and on all throughout the day. Your Eldritch Archer is diminishing in damage. Even though the cantrips are pretty good, your heightened spells and your spell slots are going to be more damage, but then they're gone when you use them. And on top of that, even with Eldritch Archer spellcasting, you can only get a level 8 spell slot at level 20, so you don't get that final push in damage. A great way to remedy this and supplement your Eldritch Shot damage is to use a focus spell through some kind of second archetype. Then you can use that focus spell and make a great attack every combat, not just once a day. The best of these focus spells for this purpose, it's going to be Fire Ray. If you're either a cleric or a champion of a deity with the fire domain, you could snab this one. It's a first level focus that deals 2d6 per level, automatically heightened to half your level, rounded up. That's going to get crazy. Another interesting one is Winter Bolt. It deals 1d8 of damage per level, but that damage does not double on a critical hit, so you got to take that into account. But it does do a secondary kind of damage. The Shard of Ice explodes on the monster's turn, dealing 2d12 of damage per spell level, and that damage also affects all adjacent creatures. So it's one of the few area of effect types of shots which you can get, which is really nice. Acid Splash, remember, that has a small amount of splash damage too. The D12 shard that explodes on their turn also doubles on a critical, which is ridiculous. However, there's an interesting mechanic with this one, with that Winter Bolt, where they can spend an action or 2 actions if it was a critical hit to remove the ice shard, so then they would take less damage, but then they still use up their action, so it's still kind of a win. I like that Winter Bolt. That's kind of fun. So you can see Eldritch Shot, it's the real deal. Single target precision damage. It's a precision strike at range. And that is just the ability you get with the dedication, so that's awesome. You get a whole bunch of other things with this archetype too, though. Enchanting Arrow is a 2-action power attack kind of attack that deals mental damage and stuns on a critical hit. The damage isn't going to be as good as your Eldritch Shot with your best spell in it, but it's decent damage for just 2 actions. If you have to move and then have 2 actions to attack, you could use this one. To put it in perspective, making this attack with that follow-up attack, using your 3rd action, it deals roughly as much damage as 3-action Eldritch Shot with a cantrip in it. So it's about that range. Now this is mental damage, so it won't work on mindless creatures. That's fine. I don't care about that. Here's the great part. The stun on critical hits is real nice. You'll notice no incapacitation trait on this one. So just crit and stun, no questions asked. When the DM asks you what level is it or whatever, you just tell him to bug off. No incapacitation effect. Precious Arrow gives you some options for dealing with monsters with damage reductions, which is always good, either bypassing cold iron or silver and a level 14 adamantine. This can be the difference between victory and running for your lives. Seeker Arrow is a single action, single shot that ignores cover and concealment, and there's no restrictive traits, so you can use this one over and over and be the only person in your party that's hitting that concealed target. Want to shoot through a wall? Of course you do. Phase Arrow, that's the one you want. It's only once a day. I don't like that. This one has that rare +4 circumstance bonus to your attack, which is super nice, but it has that restriction. They have to be wearing armor. Plus, it ignores everything concealed, hidden. You just have to know their general location and let the magic do the rest. Arrow of Death, great name for a heavy metal band. Greater name for an Eldritch Archer 18th level once a day ability. Do you like 10d10 precision damage? That ooze doesn't mind it, so there's always that part of it. But the more damage, you can do more damage with an Eldritch Shot, but either way, this isn't a bad one to have in your arsenal to supplement your Eldritch Shots. And finally, Impossible Volley. If it says impossible in the name of this game, it's usually really good. This attacks all targets in a 10-foot burst. That's great. centered at or beyond my longbow's first range increment. An attack to have ready to go to open up a combat. A good one to use to open up before all the monsters move up. Drop one of these in an area of effect burst. And that is it. I've been your host, Crunch McDoubles. This has been the Crunch McDoubles Show. Wipe that smile off the two-handed fighter's face with an Eldritch Shot, heightened all the way up, and in doing so, survive Galarian with an Eldritch Archer.